Well, let me tell you, Nigel, I started this project because of something I read in America where a young academic called David Rosado had looked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and had said, well, why are they talking so much about racism, transphobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, and also these new social justice or woke terms like white privilege, cultural appropriation, gender pronouns, gender neutral. And what David showed is basically the media had sort of gone off a cliff, had become obsessed with this new sort of language of discrimination and racism and prejudice. And I looked at that report and thought, well, that's incredibly interesting. I wonder what's happened in Britain. So I called up David in New Zealand and said, why don't we rerun your study in Britain? And what we found, as I shared this morning and put it on Twitter and so on, is exactly the same as America.
Was it 16 million newspaper articles?
We analysed 16 million articles using computer technology between 2000 and 2010, and what we found essentially was that references to racism up 800%, references to transphobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, all through the roof, despite the fact that every reliable piece of evidence we have suggests Britain has become more tolerant, more welcoming, more accepting, you know, less racist. So what's going on here? And that's what I really wanted to try and figure out.
So what is going on here? Is it that the media is reflecting something that you haven't spotted and I haven't spotted, that we have become more deeply intolerant? Or is it that the media is now actually leading the agenda and attempting to change the way we look at the world? Which way around is it?
My view is there's more truth now in the latter, and I think what's happened is that the media class, the people who are working in media, have fundamentally changed from the 80s and the 90s. They've become much more elite, much more likely to go to university, to pass through Oxbridge, to pass through the Russell Group institutions, much more elite than their counterparts were in the 1980s.
But you're a university professor. You're virtually saying that people who've gone to university have come out with a warped view of the world.
What I'm saying is that the ideas that we can see in this report, this idea of seeing the world as being a terrible place where racism is surging and transphobia is everywhere, and we need to revise our history and watch our cultural appropriation, I'm saying those ideas circulate much more readily in the elite institutions, and that is primarily where journalists are now coming from. And I actually think now, today, we need to really think hard about how we diversify the voices in our media. I mean, when you were coming up in politics, I imagine local media, regional media, was still incredibly powerful, right?
Absolutely.
Now, completely gutted out. So what you tend to find is journalists will go straight from Oxbridge, Russell Group universities, straight into the newsroom. And as one senior journalist said to me recently in France, he said, you know, the problem, Matt, is junior journalists don't see themselves as journalists. They see themselves as activists. They see themselves as politically motivated activists who are trying to change the world. It's a very different media from what we had in the 80s and the 90s.